Combined.
Sebastian and my
Just,
home.
2-bedroom, 1 bath, 96
Oh.
square feet.
But if I started off.
Sound down.
Yes.
Use the roof.
Yes.
If you look at it, you're surprised how bad it is. So I tore down a 1-car carport, a 1-car garage and a carport. They were flat.
Summer place?
So they were.
No.
They were so.
That's probably what everybody looked at and figured the rest of it was.
We tore that down and now we're adding on
Oh,
another.
just.
It'll be about 300.
Yeah.
Oh, neat.
I will also.
No, come on up.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Just neighbors.
Just-
You know what? I've got a camera out there. Brian is in New York. So I put up a camera so they
That's what.
can follow things.
Yeah.
People go up all the time for the meets.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of fun.
It's like their main guy who sells everything.
Somewhere.
Getting back to feedback.
Some must have a mic.
Stuff like that.
Is he older than?
Beautiful, keeps progress. It is. The more I walk around.
Right.
40 years always.
It's big.
There's money
Oh, man.
You got very lucky.
almost as expensive. That's. I got yours.
You've enjoyed us. Oh, my. Maybe it'll be a recall.
That's a joke.
Yeah.
Actually,
Holy cow.
when I was looking at it,
Like you said about cameras.
Mhm. I know it. Yes.
actually,
How could I be so dumb?
this.
Still was.
Those-
No, you were quiet.
Showing me the height. Oh, I don't know if that's on there or not, but this is a nice.
It's amazing.
So.
Get your move.
They-
Did you get the feedback? Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
There's difference.
it's good. It's my computer.
People are charged.
They're all working now.
John's
So we're 5:30 on it.
prices go up. They really.
My Apple time
truly
was
do.
yours.
Mine says 5:31,
Okay.
but get Jeff.
Wait a minute for Jeff.
And he also is. He lives on an island, so I think, because he lives, you gotta go across the North.
See if we're away. They get you to leave the bar. not
He's been up
to
here
be
for
a-
long time, resident here, long time. Good guy. To get your social circles across.
Mhm. I can't. I don't think I do.
Site plan, you could go to city council.
Yeah.
And just get permission for this residential. Just to let you know the options that you have. So.
Tonight might be.
Yeah, they just got them in this week, places.
They throw some fun booster.
No, flu shot.
Oh, flu shot. Yeah. Oh, they always hurt.
They always make my arm sore.
Yes.
Yeah, so we.
They say to use that.
Yes, I know.
When you're not allowed to use that, she's stuck in your mouth.
No, because yeah.
Oh,
it's fine.
Yeah.
We're good. We're just waiting on, right? Did I come in? I don't know. We got no shingles. Don't.
No,
scare me.
not
I
yet.
counted 3, 10. 1, 2, 3.
Yes, I understand from my
4, 5,
mother.
6. But way better than you.
Yes.
He's around the corner.
He's around the corner.
Yeah,
It's
right.
like-
It makes it official. So that's one that didn't bother me.
Oh, good.
Call meeting to order. If you call the roll, Jeff.
Absolutely. Beth Rahali,
Here.
Mary Catherine Hanna,
Here.
Emily Duvay,
Here.
Jack Deegan and George Pete are absent. Bill Mulder.
Here.
Mark Bidet.
Here.
Andrew Bowman.
Here.
And Al Dyke.
Here.
Okay.
There's Al.
Just in time.
We have the one.
Great. Minutes, August 19th, 2021 meeting. Anybody have any comments or corrections on those?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
So if anybody goes on to the YouTube and watches the video, at about 34 minutes into the meeting, we lose audio. So I did my best from my notes to recreate what I felt happened at the meeting. I think I got the general consensus of, what the decisions that we made and some of the comments that were made. But if there's anything that anybody feels that I've left out, either let's add them in and get them in this minutes, because we're kind of discussing the same topics as last month, or point it out and we'll adjust the minutes and add it in.
With that thought in mind, was there anything you thought was missing, obviously missing, or corrections? I thought they were good. Okay. Maybe we should have the audio go out.
I would move to approve.
I'll second.
That was Al that seconded?
Yes.
Yea or nay vote?
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
So I got the backup recording going as well, so we have, hopefully, so one of the three should.
One should work. Great. Public comment or correspondence, anyone here tonight for something that's not on the agenda? Anyone, are we still taking comments on virtually, or they have to be present?
We're still taking comments from the public.
I just went off to ask, was there anyone online that has a comment on anything that's not on the agenda?
I don't see anyone else online.
We did receive that one correspondence that was included in the packet from Sue Winter regarding short-term rentals.
Great. Okay. Moving on to new and old business, short-term rental subcommittee meeting. Everybody got the nice summary that was written up, plus the article in the paper. Bill, any additional information, kind of general thoughts on how it went? I think it went quite well. So.
Yeah, the meeting was very well attended with an enthusiastic crowd, and demonstrated the high level of interest in the issue in our community for both, full-time people and some seasonal folks as well. There was a mix of people concerned about short-term rentals the way they are today, as well as some hosts or owners. And both sides were heard respectfully and productively. So in that regard, the format worked great, and people were, very engaged, and couldn't have been a better and more helpful audience. So just exactly what we hoped for. And so just as an aside, I think we have a format now for discussing other issues with the community that we can roll out and
You can run them all.
Oh, yeah, great. Great. And I came away with a couple of big impressions. First one is people are expecting us to reconsider our current approach. They really would like us to step back and take a look at how the city is handling short-term rentals. People understand the overhanging Michigan legislation that could put a damper on all that, but are encouraging us strongly to move ahead anyway and to discuss it and see if we can come up with something that fits Harbor Springs and just let the chips fall where they may regarding the Michigan legislation. And the third thing I say is that people understand the balance, the delicate balance that probably needs to be achieved on this issue. There are a number of people who would just prefer to have all short-term rentals banned, but I think overall people understand that we are going to have to find a balance somehow. So, and those are the main things I took away. Anybody else have any observations? And then I have an idea about how we can proceed.
My biggest takeaway from it was very similar to yours. The one that really, I think, sort of looking at it through in light of what may happen with the Michigan legislation, is a lot of it came down to whether it's a short-term renter or a long-term renter or a landowner. It would be the enforcement of the ordinances that are in existence in terms of sort of behavioral issues, to be that loud music, or just being loud in general, or fireworks and things like that they're already on the books. And maybe not that, I think it was very helpful to have Chief Knight here, and I think he really did a great job of encouraging people to call, because I think that's always a hesitation, just either just inconveniencing the police, which is, he made it very clear that's what they're there for, to do, and that they'd be very happy to know about things. So I think, as I was almost going to joke, as a former downtown owner, I can tell you the police do respond very politely and very promptly to noise complaints. So
I would add to that, that I think, to Bill, your summary, there seems to be division in two separate issues. There's an enforcement aspect, and then there's the character of the area aspect.
Right.
So I think there was two different topics going on, and so two different things of how short-term rentals need to be addressed, and one's enforcement and one's just the general idea and character of the area related to.
And I thought the good news was, even if Lansing does take away a lot of the, we should move down this track of reevaluating our regulations for short-term rentals in hopes that they don't. But if they did, not all, but many of the major concerns from the meeting, I think, could at least be addressed, be it through, and those rules ought to apply to somebody who's here short-term or for a month or lives there, every night.
And we did have a short-term rental hearing for one of the properties that, I think it was on, what was the address again?
State Street.
Yep. And we had a hearing for them, and, one of the things we found out was a lot of the calls we received were about parking, parking in the street. Well, there's nowhere in that short-term rental ordinance that says that they can't park, that they can't have their people there parked on the street. They just says they shall inform people that they should park on the driveway, but there's no ordinance that says they can't park there. So, we discovered more potential issues that people are complaining about, but that's to say that we can't control it because we don't have the enforcement to the code to back us up there. So,
How did you go about having that hearing? Was it the
so the clerk,
neighbors?
so, nope, it was city hearing, it was a panel, the clerk, city manager, and police chief sat as a panel, and then zoning administrator acted as the one bringing the case against the homeowner, and then the homeowner there was to give their case.
But was it violations that started the process?
It was complaints. And then-
Complaints?
Yep. Mhm. So then our current code as exists says that a hearing, the city clerk can call a hearing and can decide to suspend license up to 30 days or to take any other action. So, and then there's a second hearing, then their second hearing can be held if they have repeated violations. And then you can either suspend their license for 60 days or take further action. So there's a process, but it's still a little bit cumbersome process. I mean, there's a lot of steps you have to take before, it could be, if the violation's in early June, it could be late July, early August before you have them sit down and have that hearing. So it's, that could be maybe rethought or relooked at as well as part of the ordinance of, how we're going to go about with enforcement.
I think there was another good point made by someone in the audience about, and there were many hosts, I think, that sort of agreed with it, was a way to sort of almost a certifications or a preferred renter or property in terms of complying with the rules and being licensed and sort of giving themselves almost regulating themselves as owners. I thought that was a good idea too. Any other comments from people who were there or watched the YouTube replay? Yes.
I was traveling, so I could not attend, but compliments to Bill. He managed it really well.
Yeah.
He kept the topics going. He went in with a good agenda, and he very politely, but forcefully said, time to move on. I came away with two major observations. One of them was timeliness, is what Victor just alluded to. We need to have a way to be more proactive, react more quickly. And I came away with the feeling that that's what people are expecting. And it's also the only way to really deal with violations. The second one is the vast difference in the definition that people had for enforcement. So I would caution us to be careful what we mean by that. It ranged from being more proactive and enforcing the ordinances that we have on the books to a uniformed officer driving around. Very broad. Somewhere, I'm hoping on the first side is where we end up, because the total number of complaints and the total number of properties out of the totality of what's in the city, I think the perception is skewed. We have a lot more rental properties than it would have that are just fine. And there were actually a couple of people there saying, yeah, okay experience. So that's just from an observer standpoint.
There was a good point. That reminded me, there was a question that was asked, and we didn't have the statistic that night. It might be hard to get, but there was one of the guys that was here asked a question about how many of the complaints are for the licensed properties versus are there complaints on the unlicensed properties. So it was almost, I think his question was, are some of these problems with unlicensed properties? I'm not sure if they were, but now that we have this tracking service that's being paid for by the licensing fee, we're gonna have better information, I think, going into next summer. It seems.
John, if I could just, not to be that person, but we do have 3 council members in here, so that's just, in case we're talking about city
You two can't
issues.
talk.
Just FYI.
At what point do I need to take roll
Oh,
call
we'll
for
just, that was
city
a,
council meeting?
that was a comment, we won't, as long as, we're not gonna,
I did state as an observer.
yeah, I know, but just a reminder that we can.
So I have a couple suggestions about what we could do on this thing. It's as complex as it gets. There's so many tentacles to it. It's gonna be hard to, I think, work on it as a big group, And so I'm thinking that it could make sense for maybe 2 to 3 members of the planning commission to work with Victor and Jeff and maybe brainstorm, a few packages that could be brought back to the whole planning commission to consider. And, we kind of map those to the types of complaints that there are and then the possible actions and package those up into, 2 or 3 things that we could actually react to rather than just swirling on this thing for a couple meetings. My thought is that the timing, if we're going to do something, we probably ought to hustle if we're going to present something to council. And it has to start before next season, probably before January 1. So how do people feel about the idea of another subset of this group forming a working committee and working with Jeff and Victor to kind of package up some ideas?
That's a good idea. I'm in favor of it too.
I agree. I think that's a great idea, because it's a problem. I felt from that meeting that people want something done about rentals. Not that we need to have rules that can be enforced. And it seemed to me like there were many more concerns about rentals than positive things about rentals at the meeting. Did you think that?
I think it started that way. Yeah, I think, but I actually was surprised, and I give them credit how many owners and hosts were there.
Did come,
Yeah,
yes.
or either in person or,
Good enough to come.
I thought that was helpful because it very easily could have been more one-sided in the standpoint that the people who usually were most upset are the ones who come. So I thought it was good, but I agree with a subcommittee if that works for everybody. And I'd be available if you wanted me on it, and I'd be happy to stay home if you don't want me. So whatever you guys decide.
Victor and Jeff, do you think that would be a productive exercise?
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
my only caution would be, I think the idea of a subcommittee and having a work session like that is great, but I think we should be courteous or cautious of the idea of doing too many things on subcommittees because we're not really, advertising public meetings for that. And people in the community may want to participate in some of those activities.
And maybe this subcommittee could be just exactly what Bill said. It's sort of a follow-up to this public hearing. And we did all kind of provide our those of us that were there did provide just sort of a summary, based off your summary. And maybe it's just a way that we come back with a more full report to the planning commission with, now we have the information that we gathered, and this would be more of what you might do, a first volley of what to do. And then from there, maybe we deal with it all.
For sure.
Yeah, because there's a couple of big issues that I think we would need to tackle and plan to make a recommendation to council. And one of them is, I think, for the committee, would be a good idea for the committee to have is, do we keep this in the city code or take it to the zoning code, and where the pluses and negatives with changing it from the city code to the zoning code. And then really looking at enforcement, do we want to create rules that are different for short-term rental owners than are for other property owners, especially behavior issues, right? The garbage, the noise and all that stuff, parking, one set of rules for the renters versus one set of rules for the regular public, and how is that enforceable? So those are two big issues I think we really have to tackle. And the third one is are we going to look at density, number of limits on units and where they should be located? Take those back to the planning commission decide on that, and then make a recommendation to council. I think those are three. Obviously, there's a lot of smaller
I
minor
think
issues.
those are the big,
Those are the three
those are the
big
things that are
ones.
gonna change the impact of rentals the most,
Yeah.
limiting the number where they are. And then I think you're probably getting into a situation where if you do have an enforcement officer, that officer is gonna be enforcing things other than just the short-term rental code. And I'm not sure how everybody's gonna feel about that. Because a lot of these rules that are being violated by short-term rentals apply universally to homeowners in terms of noise and fireworks and the kind of things like that, so that people may not.
And a lot of people were concerned about the low, in their mind, low fee for this license, right? And that's because we don't have an active person out there that's, we have Harmari, which we contracted with. We have, in-house staff that administrates it, but we need, if we're gonna charge a fee, we gotta, justify. So people were saying like $1,000 fee. All right, that's fine, but then maybe that's the opportunity where you get an enforcement officer. But do we want an enforcement officer going out there for those things? And that's two different questions, right? We can do it if we charge a higher fee, but is that what the community wants? Is someone out there? So those are the bigger questions that this committee can grapple with and make suggestions on.
I think for the purposes of tonight, I think maybe if it's okay, we do a subcommittee, whether we pick those, name those members now, fine doing that if you guys want to do that. If anyone wants to volunteer, by all means. And then we could set that, goal to have sort of a written response with ideas based off of the public hearing. So that makes sense.
Yep. That's
Is anyone
my proposal.
dying to be on the short-term rental next phase subcommittee?
I'll be on it.
Yes.
I'd like to continue.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I would do it if people want me to, but also if somebody else wants to,
I'm happy.
I'll
to
do it.
If you would like help.
Well, it looks like you guys did a lot of good work as a team, so.
I think being in the room is helpful to, or you could also watch the YouTube video.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Andrew's got some good background and would be helpful to have you on there.
Sure. As long as we can meet at the picnic table again.
Yeah.
So,
All right, why don't we, if that's all right, continue on with the 4 people that have worked on the meetings.
and then I agree. I think after that next round, maybe we're ready for, hopefully we're ready for discussion as the whole planning commission, because we could actually send something to council pretty soon, even for some early thoughts, because to get it ready for next season, we are coming up.
Better hustle. Yeah.
I think that part of this that's enforcement was fires and the lights and that. I'm lucky enough to live next to a violator,
Yeah.
and I call the cops off for that on that. And like Chief says, they respond.
Yeah.
They just ask, do you want the officer to drop by? And I said, no, I prefer to sleep.
Yeah.
You take care of it.
Yeah.
But it's enforcement's going to be a big part,
Yeah.
and it's bigger than the short-term rental. It's happening all over, and I think we need to, whatever the enforcement thing is there, that should carry into the rest of us.
Right. It's going to apply to everybody. And I think occupancy number, every house is basically, capped by the building department or very close to that. So I think that's something that might be pretty easy as an enforcement thing that would survive anything that the state does, because that goes beyond short-term rental. Any other thoughts or comments on short-term rental subcommittee meeting?
Rick, could we do you have any other thoughts? You've been
No, I think the enforcement is the biggest problem. And for me, the biggest problem is still, these are businesses, what are they doing in residential districts? I bought a house in a residential district so that I would be surrounded by neighbors I knew, people that took care of their houses. And it was a solid neighborhood. Now I've got somebody next door that sometimes there's somebody there, sometimes they're not. There's a house on Summit that just got sold. And people from Wyoming, and they're going to rent out short-term occasionally to very specific people. And that seems to be the catchphrase for all these short-term rentals now, that they rent occasionally, and they're very picky on who they rent to. But, you know, there are multiple families staying next to me. I thought the zoning code said you had to be one family with one extra member staying there. I mean, we have wedding parties there all the time, and these aren't related people. So that's my biggest concern.
Okay. All right.
And, you know, a lot of other people feel the same way. We're worried about that house on Summit, because that's a fairly large house. The biggest problem I think I've seen is how many bedrooms they have. People that live next door to a house that has one bedroom, couples stay there, and that's it. Those seem great. We've got 4 bedrooms next door, up to 10 to 12 people there, and that's just party time, no matter what you do. So I think limits on maybe sizes of rentals would be appropriate. And what Victor was talking about, there's a lot of money out there the city could take. It's a cash cow. Most cities have a room tax for the city or the state. And from what I'm hearing now, the state thing is going to pass because the state's going to put 11% tax on it to raise money for the budget. So I think that's someplace that the city could make a lot of money with by a room charge, bed tax.
Okay. All right. Well, I think your concerns are well represented in the notes, and we're very versed in them. So we'll take the next step and see if we can bring back some ideas to this
Yeah,
group.
well, I'm glad, you know, you're gonna have a committee look into it. But grandfathering is what worries me, that if the state doesn't do anything, or even if, you know, we can't go in and stop these people that are already there. We can't go back in time and say, no short terms, you know? Can we put a limit on them if they get grandfathered in, that it doesn't automatically go with the house, that they can short-term rent after it's sold?
Well, that's something we'll talk about at the committee, but very briefly, Larry and Jeff, this is not in our zoning code, so I don't think there would be a grandfather.
Grandfathering doesn't work under the city general code.
Yeah,
If
so
the regulations move into the zoning
then
code,
they would be correct.
as of the effective date of that provision, that's when the rules go into effect. So if you're there, you've been there legally, you can continue as a non-conforming use
That's
at
kind
that
of,
point in time. That's the huge difference between a zoning code regulation and a general code regulation.
That's my understanding why we put it in the
That's a
city
big
code.
part,
originally.
yeah. That's why we put it in the city code as opposed to the zoning code, so that we could avoid that
So that-
issue.
That's something we can talk
Okay,
about.
that's what we'll
That's a
work
big
on, yeah.
issue. Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
The other main issue, real quick, is the dollar value of fines.
Yeah.
Most zoning codes are just a misdemeanor. I mean, you have up to $500, but with the city code, there's a lot bigger latitude for the dollar value of fines.
that's probably one first question at the subcommittee is,
Yeah.
keep it where it is, or any benefits to moving it, and, you know, not to settle it tonight, but it sure feels like it's where it is in the right spot.
Okay.
Moving on to B, the master plan documents, land use, development patterns, draft goals and objectives, and land use maps. We can kind of take these in that order if you'd like. Larry, I think we had I have to admit, I looked through and jumped down quickly to the goals and didn't go over the land use development patterns quite as much as on the goals themselves. But
Well, last month, we talked about the land use development patterns. And we also talked about some of the goals. We didn't get all the way through that document that I can remember.
one of the things that came up, you made a number of suggestions, which I have notes on. But we need to finish that review. But the thing that you wanted to see was how does what we have here, draft goals dated July 23rd of this year versus what we have now. And I provided you with that red line, or Victor and Jeff did, that I produced, and you had that in your packet. So you can see the difference between what was there and what is proposed at this point in time. And obviously, even that has to be modified a little bit with where we have because of the comments from last time. So I don't know if you want to go back to land use development patterns and see if there's other suggestions that in reading those documents that you wanted to make in that, because we didn't make many changes in this at all last time. Important changes we did make, but there weren't a lot of them. And then we could, start where we left off, or we could start with goal 1 again if you desired. And with your knowledge of the red line documents, if you had other ideas or thoughts that you wanted to modify that draft goal, then we can do that.
I felt like with the red line, that really was helpful to go through, and then I sort of, went through and redlined some of the new document myself just a little bit, and I don't need to go line by line with that stuff, but it was more, I think last time we sort of took these as a general comment, and if there was something that jumped out as opposed to reading them verbatim, is everybody okay moving forward with that same program as last time? If you have comments on a specific area, but we don't necessarily need to have Larry or myself read each one, go through each one.
Would it be, I was wondering, last time, I felt like we jumped around. Can it, like, maybe, okay, does everybody have anything for goal 1?
Sure.
And then kind of go in order? Would
Let's
be
do
helpful
that.
to me?
We'll do it on a comment basis as opposed to me reading basis.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
Keep it moving. So just starting out, the July 23rd, 21 document, got that up on there. So goal 1, natural features and aesthetic character. The only thing I thought of during the whole thing, and I was being pretty picky, was under C, it said develop and adopt a tree. I thought maybe management instead of protection, management and planning ordinance as opposed to protection ordinance. I don't know if protection was ever turned into a word where you can't take anything, if you're not protecting it, if you cut it down. So is that ever a case where it could be? So I was early in the coffee mode of reading this, so I had to find something on the first page. That was my only thought. Are there any other?
It would give me pause too. We talked about we were a little queasy about, tree protection ordinances and getting too regulatory regarding trees. So
I think management and planning, I think, that management and planning is fine, but I just think protection maybe was a little strong. Any other?
Looks like we had the word corporation rather than in cooperation. First sentence.
Yep, and C, or anyone else have any thoughts on goal 1 or A through E underneath that? Okay, goal 2. Any thoughts on vibrant community, amazing vistas? And that was changed, I think, quite a bit based on the red line. So,
Yes.
I thought in E, I thought it was kind of confusing that just didn't implement a detailed waterfront plan for the adjacent to Little Traverse Bay. I wasn't sure what that meant.
For the area adjacent, we inserted area last time.
Oh, did you? Okay,
Yes.
I didn't see that.
The area adjacent to Little Traverse Bay, giving consideration.
Okay. So we should be looking at the one with the red or not the red? I'm kind of.
No,
So-
that was notes from, they hadn't incorporated
Oh,
yet.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that goes along with under C, I had a question about, we talked about maybe because the downtown visioning plan was done in 2012. I think a lot of the topics that were raised are good, but maybe not referencing that document in particular, just because it's going to be going on 10, 12 years old, but.
Or I think we talked about referencing it specifically to say the 2020 downtown visioning
For the
plan.
2012
Or
yeah.
2012 or whenever it was,
And
just so that we all know what we're referring to and we know how it
Right.
is.
And I even think you could just say, review the zoning code to consider including and remove the recommendations of the downtown visioning plan and just say, including permitting land uses which would attract more people. And that's, keep the concepts that were developed from that plan, but maybe not name that plan in particular, just now. Again, I think looking back, 3-4 years, it's gonna be 15 years away from that. And we may, unless you find that document and pull it up, it may be easier just to name the things we like from that document or that study rather, and then just put them in. Which I think every instance I found where that was named, what was pulled from that visioning process was listed.
Larry, is there any, just a question, disadvantage to taking out a reference to a downtown vision plan when it comes to seeking grant money or anything like that, or no?
I don't think so,
Okay.
because we're pulling out the specific recommendation of the downtown vision plan that we want to list here, as opposed to just generally speaking of it. So from a grant standpoint, I don't think it bothers us at all.
Just want to confirm.
And we could always add, if someone was applying for a grant, they could use the master plan and then add that as a supplement.
And, I've got a question in D, the last sentence in D. Are we talking about replanting strategy for trees owned by the city, or are we going to tell residents, here's the plan to replant the trees in your yard?
No, this would be.
These are
this is
city trees,
If you
city-owned
look-
trees.
Yeah, because
City
areas
trees.
may include West Bluff, Zoll Street, Gene Park area,
Yeah.
Ford Park, public lands, streetscape. So yeah, I interpret that as being public.
Yes.
So maybe the only way to clear that up maybe is in the first sentence to say, develop and implement a landscape plan for public areas in the city instead of just areas.
Okay. Good with goal 2 and A through E. Housing and community. New housing development, redevelopment will need to address the full economic spectrum. We do a little bit of work in the city. I think we did get some comments the last meeting on this goal as well, but the only, and B, I think was the one that was hardest to follow just from a reading it standpoint, but it almost seems if we just took out, develop a housing strategy that promotes parcels be developed residential, parcels developed residentially will do so in a matter of, if you just took out undeveloped parcels, really whether it's a developed or undeveloped.
And in A, we mentioned short-term rentals for the first time and only time. And now in light of our new information, I'm thinking we might want to be more general about regulations, okay, rather than just limiting the number here. Like, there's a whole nother class of ideas that we're percolating on right now.
Right, that could be a complicated one because if we're, and just to go back to our earlier discussion, if we're talking about keeping it in the city code, how do you regulate how many are in a zoning district? So how do you have that goal?
And I think that's a pretty narrow, like Bill said, that's a pretty narrow solution to some of the problems. I think just maybe review existing regulations and amend if necessary to determine, to help manage the impact of short-term rentals on the community.
Something general like that.
And not name a solution because there's more than one and we don't want to, like you said, limit our options. So again, this wouldn't be limiting, but if it's going to be the guiding, I think it's nice to start out right away by saying those things need to be managed.
Right, and I think managed is the right word rather than, I don't even remember what you said before, but something caught my ear, just because manage is a more neutral term.
Right, and it's manage the, and I don't even know if we say manage the impact, just say manage short-term
Manage
rentals.
short-term rentals, yeah.
And Larry, maybe it's, I don't know if you got this as well, but instead of review existing zoning regulations, maybe just review existing regulations.
Yeah,
Because
'cause
it's in the city code, so. Technical nuances, but.
With C, I almost thought, and maybe I apologize if we covered this last time, but these all seem like good things to do, whether you're a rental or a house. I almost thought just removing it all together. That's sort of, it's all those things, yard quality, landscaping, roof, parking, trash disposal. Those all are things you'd want to regulate and are regulated, I think, by blight ordinance, and dangerous structures is in the zoning code. I've been reading up on that one lately. And
Given the complexity and the equality issues that we may end up having to deal with just not a specific housing area, but the state may end up requiring us because of legislation to deal with all housing. Maybe we look at mentioning the idea of exploring a housing code for the city to manage all these items. So it's a regulation that deals potentially with every single housing unit in the city, not just short-term rentals.
And I
So the
think that
rules
would be
apply
easy to-
universally,
Yeah.
and it's known and enforced equally. That way, no one can say, well, you're just you're pinpointing us. What about the guy next door that plays his music at 3 o'clock in the morning? Not a short-term rental. What do you do about that? So you got all these special rules for short-term rentals. So let's have them for everybody.
And I think a lot of them already are in existence. I mean, there's fire code, occupancy. So I think it may be
Yes.
referencing, but having someone,
Well, I'm
more
not
comfortable.
saying here that,
Yeah.
remember that this is an objective to explore the idea of a housing code.
And
Okay?
a housing code just essentially pulls all of those disparate pieces that kind of exist in lots of different places into one spot, right?
Two covers.
Right, so it's not like you're adding, Andrew, it's just you're
Right.
grabbing all of those things.
It's basically, if
that
you
exist in
remodeled
different
your
places.
house, you would come into contact with all those things. But
Right.
if you just sell, and I have had people, realtors from out of the area that are very surprised when they say, okay, well, the house is being sold, do you need to check the fire alarms? And there isn't any requirement. I'm not advocating one way or the other, but I do like the idea of being able to explore it or advocate exploring those types of things.
And I do like for all housing, because I mean, here it just says rental housing.
Yes.
And I don't
Yes.
like making a distinction between rental housing
That's right.
and non-rental
And I think we were
housing.
thinking short-term rental housing, when we wrote that, but
But
it's based on what might be coming and safer just to say housing.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that makes sense to everybody, getting nods across the board. So, great.
I had one for, under A, I don't know if we corrected this last time, there's like in, two
yeah,
ins.
just-
Oh, yeah.
And then further down in B, that last sentence, elements to consider include lot size, lot coverage, and building massing. I wasn't quite sure what building massing was.
Basically the size, the three-dimensional shape, and it's, whether some regulations say, okay, the first floor can only be X percentage of the floor below, and it's to reduce the mass of it.
Okay.
So it is I
So
think that's
just as
what
a
that-
grammar comment, we do have comma and.
Yes, yes.
Housing and community, we go with the four, looks like the goal and then the four objectives. Any, Larry, did that give you some clear answers?
Well, yeah, we eliminated goal 4.
I'm sorry, I meant the four objectives underneath the goal. I was
Oh,
still,
oh, yes,
I'm still on
under
goal 3. Yeah,
Yeah,
and 4 is
yes.
gone because it's covered in other places. Not that it isn't important, but it was already included.
Yes.
Recreation, goal 5. Anything jump out at anybody? And again, grammatical stuff I think would be important, but also I think last time we talked about maybe we're just marking up and sending anything to Larry that we would want to.
Yes. Or send it to Jeff if you
Send
can
it to Jeff.
consolidate it, however.
I think goal 5 and those 4 objectives underneath are all solid. Does anybody feel strongly about changing anything there? All silent. Goal 6, residents and visitors will enjoy a unique collection of recreational opportunities. Hard to argue with that. Any comments on A through G? Hearing none. Goal 7, more to do with the recreational plan, facility improvements and whatnot, and then the A through E underneath. Thought these were all pretty good. Quite good. Any comments, improvements? Violent disagreement?
Just some long historical stuff. But we worked very well with the school district years ago.
Yeah.
And they had a community school program that was part of the school, so it wasn't part of the city. And they ran all kinds of recreation programs, night school classes, open the shop at night, things like that. And they also cooperated with us when we built the skating rink. And the deal we made was that we will build it and you operate. And 2 years later, they dissolved community schools and the city was left operating. And for 2 years, the Offield family covered the expense, but then the city taxpayers paid for the rink and it's the supervision and still do this cooperative thing that we did with the school district falls apart. And I guess it's a trust issue, but we can't control what they do and should
It
we
was community
plan?
school, was that a millage, the way those were funded, did they just sort of go away universally, or not to get too far off into that, but
I don't remember.
I don't remember why it went away, but I remember it going away.
I don't think it was a funding thing, unless there were state funds involved. I know you get special points for cooperating with the local school district on recreation opportunities in your community when you're applying for grants. Other than that, there's really no advantage to it,
Is that
other
something-
than just the economics of it, and it makes a lot of sense.
And I get Al's point about it's hard to hold independent parties to that when we don't have any jurisdiction over it. But is that, to Victor's point, is keeping something like that in our master plan advantageous later on for grant writing, or would we consider a change?
Well, I think it's advantageous for that, and also for, if we get into a recreation plan, to partner with the school district in any way we can, because that helps in bolstering the validity of that plan and also points for grants. Yes, it is helpful.
And I
In that
take your point
situation.
about trust and holding to it, but I still think it's a good goal to have.
Yeah, no,
to
I agree. And I
cooperate
think
with
we
the
probably
school
keep it, but
district.
maybe in the execution of any specific project, that's something to keep in mind.
Yes.
That maybe there's a look back if their funding changes and they have to back out, and whether it's a school or another surrounding township or something.
Okay.
Economic development goal 8. Spend some time on these.
I've got one on C. We talked about architectural standards a couple times, I think, and I want to take everybody's temperature. Is that something that this group feels we ought to pursue?
I have C crossed out.
Okay, good.
I would agree with you.
Yes.
Good answer.
It is. I did get an email. I encouraged this person to come for public comment today, but he didn't come, but he actually was looking to see if we could set up some sort of historical architectural commission, and I told him to come here, but he didn't. But anyway, not everyone's against it, but there are people who want it. But
And that
I told him
that
he's not here.
was added, if I recall correctly. And the reason it was is through the community opinion survey, there was not a huge leaning, but there was a soft leaning toward it. And so I thought, adding the objective of doing a focus group on that topic, it doesn't mean we're going to do anything. It's as we've done with other topics now. We're looking at it to see what the community thinks about that idea. We have been down that road before. Okay, a couple of different times. I got a folder on it that, every time I pick it up, it singes my fingers because it goes so far, then it just explodes. Because once you get into the details of that, what are you going to tell me I have to do here? So
Maybe we say explore conducting a focus group.
Well, maybe it's not just architectural standards. Maybe there's also incentives, or maybe we don't use the word standards.
We went down very, very briefly, the idea of sort of, I don't know if this has kind of fallen out of favor in general, but a form-based code where it was more, and that, to me, that was the only thing I ever felt at all comfortable, with, as opposed to we look at some of and they're all very nice neighborhoods, but you can tell what neighborhoods, not just in our area, but around the state, have architectural standards and material lists, and they get quite detailed, and they sort of start to all look. Aerodynamics now dictates what cars look like, and they all look like Tylenols, driving down the road, because they have to, because they got to meet certain standards for efficiency. But I don't know that it's, and what the standard is now is not what the standard was 25, 30 years ago. It's not going to be that 50 years from now. So I think a more kind of organic development of the towns. Yeah, we have a few things here and there, maybe we would change personally, but on the whole, I think things look
Well, and I-
authentic because they grew out of, some out of necessity, some out of personal taste, not out of a book.
Right.
But form-based code can be much more general in the sense of
Exactly.
not getting
Form-based, yeah.
into
And that's the one I like.
architectural standards, but can be more like,
It's sort of a give and take. Hey, if you
Right.
reduce massing, you're gonna get maybe a lead. So I think that maybe it's, I'm okay with sort of explore conducting focus groups to discuss community desires of inflating, I would say,
to implement a form-based code or to implement pieces of form-based
Yeah.
code or the philosophy of
Yeah.
form-based code.
I
or
like that
something
better than
like that.
architectural standards. I think that too quickly jumps to homeowners association.
Form-based coding can be very detailed architectural elements, in terms of how much glass, how much hard, what kind of hard surface you can have on the front of your buildings, lighting. I mean, it can get very detailed, or it can be very soft.
Shapes. Yeah.
In just general shapes and stuff, and there's just general parameters that are there. So it's, the whole idea of exploring a focus group for form-based coding.
Concepts of form-based code.
Yeah.
And that gives you more opportunity to educate people too on what a
Sure,
form-based
right.
code could do
Yeah.
or not do, and whether we think
It
that's
was,
interesting.
in the time I've done it, it seemed like the one that had the most chance of working and potential benefit for a town like Harbor Springs as opposed to architectural standards in the traditional sense.
Yes. Now, the way item C, the way it's crafted right now, is focusing on the central business district. Do we want to broaden that to the whole city? Or do we just want to continue to focus that in the
I think the
CBD?
only place right now you have to get, I don't know this, but if you do your house, you don't need to come to planning commission for a site plan approval.
Right.
So if you put form-based code over the residential districts, are we suddenly gonna have every house that's being built or remodeled come into planning commission? So I think in my mind, it's always been central business
Yeah,
district.
it's a matter of scale too.
Yes.
Where the form-based works much better on the commercial scale level than a residential.
Because you have setbacks
Stuff.
already. And
Yeah, it's,
maybe it's enough to say the business districts, not just central, B1 and B2,
Yeah.
There's always sort of an odd distinction between those two that shouldn't be.
I never understood why we had that. That's a separate conversation.
Yeah. We'll get to that. I agree. So yeah, maybe just business or commercial districts.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, comments on goal 8 and A through F? Hearing none. Goal 9. Spend some time on this one as well, I think. Obviously, several objectives underneath that. So goal 9 and then the A through G. Any comments or thoughts on those? My only comment was, again, I just thought it did a nice job under F of describing an action that was identified in the downtown visioning plan, but it was maybe enough to just say that as opposed to referencing the plan. But, I don't care if that stays. Anyone else have any thoughts on that one? Hearing none, waterfront and harbor. Goal 10 and the 4 objectives underneath. I thought under A, it might be enough to just stop after desirable community views, just put a period there. I thought that second part was kind of redundant and might potentially be used to.
The second sentence.
Under A, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it would just be, if appropriate, revise regulations to foster design which maximizes desirable community views, period. I thought it was, that makes the point that we need to make, and then.
I'm confused. Okay, this is item E, waterfront and harbor.
No, item A,
Ending
item-
sentence right there.
Okay.
first one, sorry.
All right, thank you.
And it just makes it more concise, and it leaves, I think, again, we're dealing in broad
Yep.
objectives, and I think to get specific in the second part, the second clause.
Okay.
If that makes sense to you as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, got it.
And I thought D, it's so hard to say what proper language is, so maybe if we just said review the zoning code for the use and redevelopment of existing private property in the waterfront district, just review it, not to assure proper language, I don't. Yeah. I mean, again, I had too much coffee. So.
That's good. Pumping too much coffee seems to work.
Right.
Then number C, while we've been working on the master plan, it's been done.
Consider, I'm sorry, Bill, so consider it, folks.
Which one? C?
The
For
Marina
Marina
Park. Yeah, they have had a number of focus groups, so is that completed?
Might be.
So we have created a committee, council has created a committee for that, so that is looking at what should be there in the long run. So I mean, yes, we've already created that committee, so.
So we can eliminate item C, consider a focus group to advance discussion for the Marina Park.
I don't know, because
Or continue to support.
yeah, continue to
yeah.
support, continue or more action or something, because I don't want to lose that altogether as a goal. I think
Okay.
it's
Yeah, I think it
important.
started, but I wouldn't say it's finished,
Right.
so maybe a way to just bring it up to the current state of that project.
Well, and I believe the idea is that, you know, eventually there's going to be a new marina building and we're gonna have to relook at that park property anyway, so the continued use of.
We've been working on this so long, they keep doing things. Okay,
They're good for waterfront and harbor, and the 4 objectives underneath those comments. Any others? Goal 11. Talks about any development or redevelopment, maintaining open water views and open water for public to enjoy. I think that's, any comments on that? We went through that one pretty extensively in the past.
So passive aquatic activities is probably, again, a term of art. What are passive aquatic activities?
laying on a raft.
Yeah. So you're treading water, not actually swimming.
That's right.
Maybe, that is an interesting term now that you say it.
Well, I make that comment only because I did swim in the bay quite a bit this summer, and I gotta tell you, it's kind of scary.
What about recreational? I mean, or,
So
oh,
So what were we getting at non-boats? So we're getting at like paddle boards and kayaks, or what were we getting at with the passive aquatic activities, I guess is the question.
I almost think it's sort of like, the intent might be to say, kind of non-commercial, but I don't know how else to say that.
Or non-motorized,
Well,
because I'm sure you're basically referencing motorized traffic. I guess it could be canoers
yes,
or
if we
kayakers
hadn't
too.
had kayakers and boats with us on the swim,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure people would
Well-
have gotten nailed.
Oh, yeah.
you're supposed to swim with a drag buoy, with, I mean.
We did,
it's-
we
it's-
do,
Yeah,
but
it's
even
taking your life
so,
from your hands,
yes,
so,
anyway.
But those big ones are hard to pull along with you.
Yeah, you don't need any extra
Resistance training.
It's good for you. I guess.
I mean, is non-motorized a bad, because I think the idea is that, paddle boarders,
I think we're, yeah,
canoers.
you're not eliminating, we're not, I think you're preserving space for, so it's not motorized traffic and making sure you've accounted for the non-motorized portion of it.
Or just maybe maybe it's ensure development in the open water portion of the harbor
Preserve space for,
includes all
Yeah.
water recreational activities or something so that it's inclusive rather than
Yeah.
exclusive in its language.
promotes a broad range of,
Motorized
aquatic
and
activities.
non-motorized water activities or
yeah.
something to that effect.
yeah, I think that's the right
that's
direction.
better. And I think, because if we leave it at that, if we make it inclusive, and then the harbor, we're doing the harbor plan update, they can really analyze,
Right.
What specific, yeah, exactly. So if we just say, make sure it's inclusive for all water activities, then the harbor commission can nail.
And again, maybe restrict isn't the right word, but manage.
Right, just,
Because we're not the experts. on
Ensure
this, we're on the water.
that development includes.
right, exactly. Somehow ensure that development includes all of them. Yeah.
Considers motorized and non-motorized water activities. transportation safety and pedestrian amenities. This is about as exciting as the goals get. Any comments on 12 or the 4? Very important, but
The safe bike route to the downtown area, is that currently undergoing, or is that completed? Or?
Yes, so it's currently ongoing. We
Okay.
are monitoring rain
Oh.
fall limits on the tunnel
Oh,
spillway.
okay.
So we're still, we report back to MDOT and
Okay. So B under 12 is still appropriate to keep in here, right?
any other comments or thoughts on 12 or A through D? Hearing none, goal 13. I think that's a good goal and it's pretty well defined by the
North along M119. That's more commonly recognized. Yeah, okay. Gotcha. All right.
Public facilities and services. Goal 14 and A through F. We added, and since Andy Shepard Tolsdorf was here, I guess that was investigating placement marks. I mean, if we updated, she was here after
Just last month.
so
Yes.
this hasn't been,
It hasn't been adjusted.
yeah. There were some specific things I think information we were able to get from her, but I think the goals would be, and the objectives would remain the same. We might just have more specifics for the ordinance if we get into that.
Okay.
we received a comment, and this is just for F, but at the Marina Park Committee surveys that we put out, someone had mentioned the idea of charging stations for e-bikes, because those are on the increase. So we have EV charging stations. So I don't know if that encompasses e-bikes in this goal F, but it's just something to think about if we should plan for charging stations for electric bikes as well.
And I think the location of maybe where the EV charging stations are could be thought about more, since they tend to be there for quite a while and not
Yeah, that's
necessarily
something we've
loading and
talked
unloading.
about.
So, but it was probably a close proximity to the source was probably
That's
the main
what's
driver
because-
there.
That was the main driver. Second main driver was because they were free.
Yeah.
They were free stations for us. We didn't have to pay.
Do we want to drop under item F, the EV, or just leave it as charging stations?
Yeah.
Just
So that would
generic,
cover,
yeah?
I mean, a bike is, I guess it's probably not qualified as an EV.
It's not a
because
vehicle.
You have to pedal to make it go, but.
Okay.
Cool. Any other comments on the public facilities and services goals and objectives? Going once, twice. Goal 15, utility services, and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objectives underneath.
Got an update on 15C is that we're actually going to council on Monday. So the state mandated program that requires us to contract with someone like Efficiency United to have energy efficiency conservation programs is sunsetting in December. So we have 3 options as a city: is one, to do nothing and don't offer any programs, or contract with our MPPA or another provider, or tackle it in-house, and we can set our own budget. So right here, we have it as explore the pros and cons, run by Efficiency United. Maybe we take that part, run by Efficiency United, and maybe just say explore the pros and cons of energy efficiency and conservation programs.
Okay,
Or
that makes sense.
because it might necessarily be with Efficiency United, and it's still, yeah. So.
Gives you more broad options.
Right.
But council will give their opinion and decide on Monday on how to go forward. So that might even change. Maybe we come back to 15C based on.
Okay. Okay.
Any other comments or thoughts on goal 15 and the 5 objectives? Hearing none. roll-
Just really quick, I know it's a grammar thing, but I had to write it down. E says, technology need to be reviewed, should be reviewed annually.
Reviewed it.
Yeah.
Technology needs to be reviewed.
Good there, going to goal 16. What I spoke about earlier, and then so it's 16 and then A, B, and C.
I was wondering under B if it should be counties, include other counties, or is it just our county?
Well, that's a good point, because we are part of the CCE, the Sheboygan, Charlevoix, Emmett County 911 response thing. And so we kind of collaborate on emergency E911 stuff with different counties. I mean, our main focus is with this county, but we are part of the CCE, so maybe it should be counties.
And there are a lot of regional planning
Or there, yeah.
initiatives that Emmett County participates in and River is part of, so yeah.
We got all the bases covered, the counties, regionals. So, okay,
16, we're with those changes, A through A, B, and C. Any other changes there? Hearing none, I think we're through the objectives. So would that be enough for you to do
yeah, a redraft. Yep.
quasi-final draft for the next month?
If in the next week, while this is fresh in your mind, you have other things that we haven't talked about that you haven't run across, send them to Jeff. He'll get them to me.
And grammatical stuff too.
Anything like that, and it'll just continue the process moving more efficiently through if you have other ideas that you'd like to have added. Thank you.
No matter how small, no matter how big.
That's right. So, just going down the bullet points, the land use maps, we have copies that were in our packet. Existing land use, pretty self-explanatory, and then the 2013 future land use.
So I do have a couple small points about the existing land use map. So these are obviously larger blow-ups of the maps that are included in the master plan. I contacted Benchmark. They originally did these for us. They gave me some better copies so that we could look at. The colorings that we have on the handouts are ever so slightly different than what's in the actual master plan, but the detail is the same. The existing land use, I do suggest a couple changes. Obviously, we need to update. There's some indications on here of vacant properties that are no longer property vacant that have been developed. For instance, Easy Street is a good example. That's shown as a vacant. I think there's only one lot left that hasn't been built up yet in there.
Correct.
Another area is Washington Court. That's been split into lots. I think 2 of the lots have now been combined with home. So I'll contact them and get some of that simple stuff updated as far as noting whether property is vacant or not vacant. The other thing that I think that we should note on here is maybe specifying a new category, and Victor and I talked about this. Conservancy property on here is just shown as vacant land.
Yeah.
And I think that if someone's just
Or
looking at
agricultural,
this,
which-
yeah. So I think that we should add a category for things that, yes, they're vacant, but we're not looking to have those be improved, or they can't be improved, such as conservancy property.
I think anything, I mean, a lot of that is under easement already. And I think anything that's under an easement or under conservancy ownership, should be, that was the one thing.
Yeah, because we have those 2 parcels, that large one on the western, and then we have this one by City Hall that's in, I think there's some conservation land, right?
Yeah. The other thing that I think, and maybe this was on purpose, but this is maybe a transition from the existing land use map to the future land use map. And you can obviously see the future land use map is we're not as specific on this, and we're not looking to be as specific. A lot of those specific things would be maybe things that we do in the zoning code specifically, as opposed to showing on the map itself. We do want to be careful that we don't overly pigeonhole one property or group of properties on the map, because then we're really limiting, what somebody might want to buy that property for. But one thing that I think maybe there's clarification that needs to happen, or maybe this was the intent of a previous master plan review, but if we look on the existing land use map, we have residential properties broken down into, I believe it's 4 categories. We have low density residential, medium density residential, and then we have manufactured housing, and we have multiple family residential. Manufactured housing is primarily just the mobile home park. And then multiple family residential, we have just kind of a 3 or 4 locations. We have the hillside apartments, the condos that are just down Traverse Street from there. And then we have the Bay Street Cottage area and the condos over there. However, when you transition to the future land use map, when you look at hillside apartments, the Bay Street Cottages, and the Colonial Inn, those are labeled as medium density residential, which is a decrease in density. And I guess my first question is, we really only have on the future land use map 2 residential categories, low density and medium density listed. Are we happy with showing those ones that are currently high density use? Are we happy with showing that we would like to see a reduction in density? Or do we want to amend that?
I think it would make
It's gonna
sense
lead
to at
into
least
discussion.
identify on the future land use, we at least ought to identify, existing, I would certainly say that it's really Bay Springs and Bay Street Cottages all together, sort of at the corner of Zoll Street and Bay. That would be, I think, higher than what the medium density. That's probably the multifamily or high density, And then I also think maybe do your idea of, just for clarity, of putting the properties on here that are conservancy or undeveloped because of wetlands or steep slope. But just, I think that when you first look at it, you think there's all this open space, and there is, and sort of on the edges, but if you don't understand it, and most of us will, but kind of the topography or exactly where those and a lot of those conservation pieces were developed or created because they were too wet to do anything else with anyway.
Or parks. I mean, that was the other thing,
Yeah.
and maybe that goes along with conservancy is, you've got public land, which I
Right.
don't really quite understand what that means, but the parks aren't identified on this land use map either.
Okay.
And I think that would be useful.
And one thing, going back to what Jeff was saying about the difference in the existing and the future. So the future has all this white here, it's just labeled as LDR, low density residential. And maybe that's what we want, but then when you go to the existing land use map, you have only a couple parcels that are classified as low density. I mean, there's really only 6 or 7. The rest are classified as medium density. So is it really our intention to change all these kind of yellowish, goldish lots that are classified as MDR into low density residential as is all these white categories? So I mean, that's something we need to clarify and get.
Well, and it might be helpful as an educational piece for us to understand, and maybe this, again, term of art that's being used, because low density isn't something that's in the zoning code.
No.
Defined, right? So like, what are they,
What are the
whoever,
qualifications?
right, what did they mean by that when they did this? And so then maybe we can adjust that.
Give the terms same definition.
Right, so making sure you're comparing apples to apples, and then maybe that needs to be on the legend somewhere that low density means X and such,
Per square feet.
whatever that is.
Yeah, and I think if you did, if you probably just, in terms of what we think of locally as medium density residential, looking at the existing land use map, you'd say, yeah, that's, 60-foot lots is kind of medium. And it is indicating that we're trying to go lower than that. So if nothing else, the whole master plan map, yet residential should be a minimum of yellow to match medium, because it's not low, you'd think would be a house every 2 acres or something. But again, unless we have the definition, we don't know.
Or unless the intention is to decrease density, which I don't think
Yeah,
that's
I don't think
where we've
that's-
been going.
Right.
Well,
That's-
one of the things, and it's something that I will look at under our existing land use, there should be a description of those categories within the background analysis of what that means. The same way with the future land use, the master plan designation, there's a description there of what residential means to that. And neither one of those is R1A, R1B. None of that is zoning. Okay, and it's one of the most common mistakes that I run into is when people look at a master plan map and they look at a zoning map, and they, why are these so different? Well, because that's the nature of the beast. They are different. An existing land use should generally reflect the ideas that are in your zoning code from a density standpoint. So let me go through, because I've never really been that involved with that. The existing land use map benchmark with the city manager's assistants has always done that. And it was kind of cute. Jeff ran across some earlier versions of that. And he goes, the colors were all different at the time. I said, well, that's because engineers did it.
Yeah,
They're
right.
not planners, and they didn't understand. There's a color code for land use categories that the engineers didn't understand. So I provided them with that category. And those are kind of general codes for colors of, residential is generally orange or yellows or light yellows. Commercials are red, and public lands are usually green. So there's a general color code for that. But we can certainly break that down with parks and other
With
sort of
that
things.
color code, is there, and maybe there aren't, but like Mary Catherine was saying, are there general standards of, okay, a low density is X number of houses, units per square foot or acre or whatever?
Per acre, yes, yes, there is.
Because we ought to have those, that we don't want to at least have, again, the map should be reflective of what we're thinking, and I don't know that we're looking to increase density.
Well, the
significantly.
existing land use is.
Well, I mean, in the future
land use, yeah.
future, we don't want it to be looking like we're trying to decrease everywhere density.
No, but that's where description and the future land use section of the master plan
Would make sense.
is making those descriptions of what kind of densities we're talking about. Whether we're talking, 0 to 1 to 8 units an acre in that general category,
Yeah.
or are we talking from 1 to up to 4 units per acre? And then you got to, a lot of times I'll take and relate that also. What is 4 units an acre? What's that mean? Okay, well, that's about a 10,000 square foot lot, give or take.
Which we have.
And so, wait a minute, ours, we get down to like 6,500. Well, see, we have some pretty small lot
Well, that's
sizes.
why I would say we're probably better described on the, our future land use map as medium density is probably mostly what we already have in terms
Yes.
of divisions. And we don't necessarily want to see those lots combined and made into bigger lots. So I think that ought to be defined and then be reflected on the map. So is that information you could bring back next month as far
Yes.
as what
Yes,
to add as far as that goes?
I can. I will.
Any other questions or things that jump out either from Beth's phone or anyone who's actually here?
Jeff, what was the thought with, we have the map here, was the thought is just this meeting to start thinking about how we want to look at the future?
We can get right into that now, or if you would like to think of, contemplate on this, but I think the general idea is looking at what we have in the community and reflecting, obviously the future land use map, what do we see, what changes do we want to see in the future? And the future land use map is what we can do to provide that direction. So do we see areas in the community where we would like to see an increase in density or some type of a change or a decrease in density? And we can, if you want, you can think about that and we can come back and discuss it more next meeting, make some notes on the map, or we could get right into it now and just say maybe Lake Street, we want to see,
I think it's a big enough
more units or something.
topic. I mean, I think more importantly, and sort of keying off the caution that we got earlier was, let's make the future land use map more reflective of what we have now. And I think it's safe, if we have a definition of medium density or multifamily in the master, or the concepts in the master plan, and then we just shade large areas of, and much of it's just going to be putting on how they're already divided. There's some areas of town where the lots are particularly large, but I don't think without a lot of more public input, we would change those significantly. But I think in the master plan, we can handle it with words and say, we are exploring the ideas in the housing goals we just went through. of decreasing lot size, of doing that without naming, you know, between this street and that street. But I think by shading the future land use map, right now, I think you could safely do it all as medium density. And that would be way more reflective of what we already have.
Well, and I think having a good understanding of what medium density
Yeah.
is and what it means would really help, because medium density might in the end cover everything that we have been talking
I
about
think
in
it probably
terms of
does.
changes.
Yeah, I mean, high
And so
density
then
is
that's much easier.
multi-units in a, you know, in a building
to-
problem.
But I
It's
think there's
vertical.
also another aspect of this, the land use map that we want to look at. It's not just about densities. Do we want this to be more commercial? This is residential zone. In the future, do we want, you know, Main Street or Third Street to be more commercial? You know, right now we have this purple, if you look in the map, that's right now is what our future land use. We hope that this will all be commercial. Do we want to extend that? Do we want to decrease that? So it's more than just density. I think it's also about commercial versus residential versus mixed use areas. So it's really about looking at this map and saying, here's where we want. We want maybe more on Lake Street, or we want less on Lake Street. I think so there's density, that's one aspect, but it's also what do we want the town to look like? And that's where that needs to be reflected on this map.
Right. And mixed use is a good example, because there's the stretch between Arbor and Ottawa that is that residential office and service area.
Which we sort of expanded the definition on that not too long ago.
Yeah, so is a neighborhood like that, do we envision that there could be other areas in Harbor Springs where that would be?
And I think this, kind of once this group has a better handle on that, it might be the last area that we do a public forum on to, put up some maps and say, all right, get out your sticky pens and your sticky notes and.
Larry, would it be accurate
Give
to
us
say
some
if we
input.
make, and I think we have, maybe make a more clear stated goal, and the goal of the master plan and we talk a lot about reevaluating zoning districts and things, as opposed to having to wait 5 years to redo the master plan or do the future land use map, state in there that we are going to explore the ideas of, blending more zoning codes or creating new zoning codes that are a better definition of mixed use, where, Third Street's always one that's interesting and very much blends between commercial and residential. And it's kind of an opportunity to have, well, do you need a moratorium against any houses in between? It's sort of, there are old buildings back there that have fallen into that niche where you can't really do much with them because they have to be commercial, but they really haven't been in the past. So I guess maybe that's even a second phase to the master plan process, which we could wrap up in. We could spend another, 6 months probably just on redoing some of these things. But I think if the master plan states that as a goal, or more clearly states it as a goal, we jump right into that almost as we're finishing the master plan.
Your master plan map needs to be a graphic illustration of what you want to see the city achieve basically in the next 20 years. Now, that being said, it's not going to dramatically change in the city of Harbor Springs. There's not going to, because we don't have a lot of vacant available land to do anything with. Okay, so what does that mean? Central Business District area. Okay, are there areas there we want to see altered a little bit? Do we want to bump those boundaries out in any which way?
Well, there's some
we've-
odd islands of
we've-
B1 that are not.
That's zoning though.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's zoning. So what should be the commercial boundary, and what does that mean in that commercial boundary that we draw on that? Or should there be some fringe areas to the central business area that is mixed use? That could be a combination of housing, maybe more of a multiple family housing, maybe 2 stories. I don't want to say apartments, but just living units within a 2-story building, and there's a commercial use right next door to it. It's a mixed use area, okay? Or there's commercial on the bottom and living units on the top. We allow that now within our zoning code. So, but does that boundary want to change any? Okay, and that's always been a tough question here. And the answer has always come up in all the master plans that I've been involved with is no. We don't want to really move that boundary, but I'm starting to hear maybe there's some mixed use category. So maybe we develop a mixed use category generally speaking, and here in our master plan that we can draw on the map is to look at those areas on the fringe in some areas.
Well, and I think that's right, Larry, because I think words matter in that sense. And if we identify the downtown as commercial, we all know it's not commercial. We all know it's mixed use. Like that's the way it already gets used. And so if we talk about it as commercial, does that put people in a certain mind frame when thinking about it, looking at it? Whereas if you call downtown mixed use, would that draw people to think about the downtown in different ways and think of potentially interesting and fun and cool new uses for buildings and for spaces?
And I think the only, and it would be the way you did it, is you don't necessarily want some of the more intensive commercial uses, restaurants or retail, to be out, blending out into the residential neighborhoods around them. But you really almost want more kind of mixed use in terms of more residential kind of coming in at the edges of the CBD. So that's probably a way that you write it, but I don't have a problem with creating a different, again, we're not creating a zoning district, we're just creating a master plan.
Lake Street from Hoyt down to Ottawa or so, okay? We created a zoning district many years ago, actually, called ROS, Residential Office Service, because that area was starting to transition and change a little bit. Well, it really didn't do anything. It changed a little bit.
If anything, some businesses left that had been there for a while.
And it kind of fizzled a bit, if you will. So nothing has really happened with those 2 or 3 areas. I can't recall where. I know from Ottawa to Hoyt on the north side of Lake is the biggest one we have in the city. It seems like there's a couple of other ones in the city zoning wise. But that's something we should think about is maybe we need to reconfigure that master plan idea as to what those areas could be. Because I don't think that one is working real well in terms of achieving what we wanted to see achieved and provide opportunities that people aren't taking advantage of. Okay, because there's I think some neat opportunities for that ROS area, especially between Ottawa and Hoyt on the north side of Lake, that can really get to some of the goals that we have and the objectives in our master plan. I think that's a primary, because there's a lot of land right there, a lot of land. The commercial area, it's State Street and Lake Street. With the IGA and the auto repair and stuff. Do we want to look at, should that expand or control? Which, should we do anything with that? The industrial area, should they expand? The industrial areas are really just boat storage facilities and the city, DPW offices and compound, if you will, and the bus garage. That's what's in our industrial areas. We don't have per se manufacturing.
Well, I think a lot of our objectives weren't necessarily in the master plan or not, not to discourage industrial, but it's sort of adding to some of the kind of environmental protection elements of that. So it's probably our.
So you need to think about if we don't do this evening, which doesn't seem like everybody's probably getting pretty hungry. But to think about those areas and those terms, take out the 2013 master plan, read those descriptions of what that means there, and think about, well, how should we adjust? Should we create new ideas to put into this document that really start to bring forward our goals and objectives to put into that concept of the master plan, future land use?
And I think that the most important thing is going to be having what the definitions of kind of medium density, because that, we, like you said, all the concepts we've talked about, even in the housing public.
Right, if you talk about
those may all
duplexes,
fall under
quadplexes.
medium, in which case, we could update this map pretty comprehensively with that one definition.
Sure.
And then look at pockets of areas without, again, I'm always concerned or confused a little bit about, well, you don't want to identify specific properties as being changed, but we could add again, in the descriptions, maybe that's the way to handle it,
Yes.
on the map itself.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly.
That makes sense to everybody for kind of what, and does that make sense to you guys for what we would want for the next meeting, is just those definitions of what's already on the existing maps? Good, absolutely. With that, member comments, any member comments?
So I guess this is where I say bye. I let Victor know this is actually gonna be my last planning commission meeting. I know your face.
We have to vote on this.
I am leaving I'm not leaving Harbor Springs. I am taking a new position. I have been offered and accepted the role of the county administrator for Alpena County.
Wow.
So I am moving over to the sunrise side of the state. Sunrise side of the state. I was trying to say sunset, but I already live on the sunset side of the state. Right,
Yeah.
well, a little birdie called me and told me about the gig, I must have.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a surprise.
So even though I will still be living in Harbor Springs and still own property here, I just don't feel like this is something I can continue to.
Oh, you're gonna commute to Alpena County?
Well, I have an apartment over there, but yes. It's 2 hours. I did it this morning. I was in Alpena this morning for a 9 o'clock meeting and back over here to this afternoon. So
Congratulations on the new position.
Thank you.
We're obviously
Very
sorry to-
exciting. So it is exciting. It is exciting, but yes. So.
Congratulations.
And I really have enjoyed being a part of this process, and I'm really gonna miss seeing it through to the end and have enjoyed working with everybody. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you
Well, that's a hell of a member comment.
Didn't see that coming, did you?
Top that.
Sorry to see you go, but
Remember.
congratulations on the new
Thank you.
job, so. Anybody got anything on top of that?
Not to top it. We are replacing Mary Catherine with a student from the high school. No, we did pick our students. No, that's just to say that we got our student members. Council will appoint them on Monday, but Max Bassett is who we chose for the planning commission. So, so he'll start. Jeff will get in touch, but after he's appointed, he'll start with the planning commission group.
Going once, going twice. Anything else I'm supposed to do before we adjourn?
Next meeting, October 7th.
That's what it is.
My birthday, I won't be.
Well, we do have 3 potential topics for the next meeting. We have 1 special land use for a guest quarters structure, and then 2 other potential site plans that we will be taking a look at.
And are we, October 7th, special meeting, master plan, are we up for that? Unless we're getting further notice. Okay. Very good.
Can't get out of it.
No.
You try.
Wait, is your birthday the 21st?
No, 7th.
My dad's is the 21st.
So is
I
mine.
get that. So, I'll be here. So, all right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
What's that? Thank you.
This is the
I will, I mean, obviously, you know, on some things.
Oh, did you get my message back? I left your message.
Yeah, I'll do that.
I will.
Jenny.
You might get.
We moved on.
It's about 30,000, 10,000 in the city, another 10,000 are in the surrounding township, and just 10,000.
Candy, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very concentrated.
That's
wonderful. Yes, yes, the county will lead us, obviously.
Sure.
You can give it. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yes, I really miss this process, so, yeah.
And that's the qualification where the building.
It's going right away.
Miss you.
I like to condense all of my comments last time into. Yeah, we like to see the map, yeah.
Well, it was a meeting, but it was a good point. Land use.
Yeah, I'll send it to you tomorrow.
What was his last name?
Yes, I was actually, so I've got to go.
He's a cool guy.
Okay.
No, I get it too. I mean, doing money to spread it around, but
Right.
it wasn't intentional.
I know.
It's neat. It has feel in the town that kind of is trying to turn the corner.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, there are, it does, and it's working at it.
I just think that side that gets over there in the corner, but it's just tenuous because.
I was-
No, it has.
So it's a little more.